Do you really know the people around you? You might think you can spot toxic behavior, sense when the atmosphere is off, or recognize when someone crosses a line. But what if I told you that the real threats are much harder to detect? That the most damaging people often appear friendly, thoughtful, sometimes they're even family. And while you're busy guarding yourself from the obvious villains, you may unknowingly be letting in something far more harmful, the unconscious mind of others merging with your own. Carl Gustav Jung spent his life exploring these unseen forces. In his writings, especially in The Ego and the Unconscious, he explained that the true drivers of human behavior are often outside of our awareness. And this doesn't just apply to you. It applies to everyone, and that's where the real risk is. Because when someone isn't aware of their inner darkness, that darkness looks for someone else to attach to, and that person might be you. Maybe you've never thought of this before, but think now, how many times have you felt drained after talking to someone? How often have you been blamed for something you didn't do, or treated like the hero in a crisis that wasn't yours? Jung called this projection, an unconscious defense where a person pushes onto you the parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge. From that point on, you stop being seen as a person. You become a symbol, a reflection, an enemy, or a fantasy hero. And all of these roles share one thing in common: none of them is the real you. But the scariest part is that you often don't even realize you've been pulled into this psychological trap. You believe you're helping, showing compassion, being mature, but really you're sinking into emotional territory that doesn't belong to you, dealing with problems you didn't create, caught in patterns that weren't yours but now define you. And this isn't just about malicious people. Jung was clear: the most dangerous individuals aren't those who are consciously evil, but those ruled by their own unconscious minds. These are people disconnected from their inner selves, shaped by past wounds, false personas, and buried emotions. They're not wicked, they're unaware. And that unawareness is what makes them dangerous. Their harm doesn't come loudly or all at once. It creeps in quietly, through subtle remarks, passive blame, loaded silences, until you begin doubting your own perception. When you lose touch with your own psychological truth, you start becoming part of their shadow. You might be experiencing this right now, in a relationship, a friendship, at work, or even at home. Maybe you're blaming yourself, wondering what's wrong with you. But the truth is, nothing is wrong with you. What's wrong is how your mind is being used to carry the emotional weight of someone else's unconscious. In this video, we will reveal 6 kinds of emotionally harmful people that Jung would consider dangerous, not because of malicious intent, but because they act under the influence of forces they don't even see. And that's what makes them so harmful. We'll turn to Jung's own words from Aion, The Ego and the Unconscious, and Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious to help you recognize these patterns. But more importantly, we'll invite you to reflect: could one or more of these patterns be hiding inside you, too? Are you ready? Take a deep breath and continue. But be warned, once you understand this, you will never look at people or yourself the same way again. Now, imagine living with someone who constantly blames you for how they feel, who turns your presence into a trigger and makes you feel guilty for emotions you didn't create. At first, they seem gentle, sensitive, emotionally deep. But over time, you find yourself drawn into a war zone that isn't yours, and one where you're already losing. This is the unconscious manipulator, a person unaware of their own pain who projects it onto others as a survival strategy. Jung wrote, "What we do not confront in ourselves, we will meet as fate." And sometimes that fate has a face, a name, and sits at your table. The unconscious manipulator is driven by repressed emotions, unresolved trauma, and inner chaos. Instead of facing themselves, they turn you into the screen for their emotional movie. This kind of person lives in constant projection. According to Jung, projection is a natural function of the human mind, but when it's not brought into awareness, it turns harmful. In The Ego and the Unconscious, he explains that projection leads to a kind of mental blindness, a trap where we no longer see the other person for who they are, but instead turn them into a symbol of something buried within us. This is exactly how the unconscious manipulator operates. They don't really see you. What they see is a missing part of their own psyche, and they react to it as though it's real. These individuals often present themselves as victims. Everything wrong is someone else's fault, never theirs. If they're angry, it's because you made them angry. If they're sad, it's because you let them down. If they feel insecure, it must be because you think you're better than them. This confusion is so subtle that it leads you to question yourself. Was I truly cold? Did I actually say something hurtful? Am I the toxic one here? And in this way, manipulation unfolds silently, without confrontation, without any demands. It operates on a deep emotional and unconscious level, and it works. What's even more dangerous is that these people are often charming. They appear thoughtful, sensitive, even emotionally deep. This becomes a trap because you believe you can help them, heal them, or understand them in ways others can't. But what you're really doing is draining your own emotional energy, trying to save someone who refuses to face themselves. And the more you try, the more you lose your own footing. Jung warned that these projection patterns are especially harmful because they reduce you to a symbol: savior, enemy, betrayer, parent, child, anything but your real self. Living under these symbolic roles is like living inside a dream. You're no longer seen for who you are, but rather as a reflection of someone else's inner world. The only way to shield yourself from an unconscious manipulator is through self-awareness. Learn to notice these recurring patterns. Cut the invisible emotional strings tying you to their narrative. And above all, always ask yourself, is this emotion truly mine, or was it passed on to me? Because the unconscious manipulator doesn't storm into your life. They slip in through the doorway of your empathy. And once you can see this clearly, the next layer of deception begins: the mask of the persona. This mask doesn't just project, it lives only to be seen as something it's not. In the next part, we'll dive into the persona bearer and how it represents one of the deepest psychological risks Jung described. Because while the manipulator tosses their inner chaos onto you, the persona bearer can pull you into a world so artificial, even you begin to forget your true self. If this message is resonating with you, click the subscribe button and join the channel. Thank you for being here. Not all psychological threats look extreme. Sometimes they appear polished, calm, and perfectly behaved. A constant smile, perfect posture, a spotless appearance. We live in a time where image matters more than substance. And for Jung, this was a serious issue. Because when someone over-identifies with their persona, the social mask we wear to fit in, they run the risk of disconnecting entirely from who they really are. And once someone lives solely through that mask, they not only lose their own identity, but they begin to twist the reality of those around them. In The Ego and the Unconscious, Jung explains that the persona is not who someone truly is, it's who they and others believe them to be. It's a construct built from cultural, family, and work expectations. Now, the persona itself isn't bad, we all wear one. It helps us play our roles in life: doctor, teacher, friend, sibling. But the trouble begins when someone starts believing that the mask is them. When the mask becomes stuck and everything spontaneous, vulnerable, and real gets locked away deep inside. The bearer of the persona becomes a master of polished appearances. They say the right things, act the right way, avoid conflict at all costs. But behind that tightly managed image lies a soul in distress. Because the more they protect the mask, the more they suffocate their true self. And keeping everything inside eventually comes at a cost. For those who spend time with this kind of person, the effects run deep. You sense that something is off, but you can't quite explain what it is. The interactions feel shallow, fake, and lack honesty. Everything feels like a performance. And what's worse, the person hiding behind the mask expects you to act along with them too. They want you to behave, to fit in, to play your role. If you show strong emotions, share doubts, or pain, they pull away. They get uneasy, they shut down. Because anything that reminds them of their buried emotions becomes too hard to handle. Jung warned that this attachment to the persona is one of the biggest blocks on the path to self-awareness, the journey of becoming whole by accepting your unconscious side. He believed the real danger starts when a person becomes hypnotized by the part they play, convinced they are nothing more than how others see them. And that's where the trap is. When someone lives just to be accepted, praised, or liked, they become a prisoner of their image. Anything real gets smothered behind that mask. Living around a person like this can make you question your own natural feelings. You begin to monitor yourself, censor what you say, and hide parts of who you are that don't match their perfect picture. Slowly, you start wearing a mask too, without even knowing it. Being close to someone like this doesn't just feel fake. It rubs off on you. But there's something even more troubling. When people push their real thoughts, feelings, and desires down for too long, they don't disappear. They build up. They bubble beneath the surface until they come out with force. And that's when we enter an even more dangerous space, the realm of the repressed shadow. This is the part of a person who won't admit they have a dark side until that darkness takes over. Some people appear calm, polite, controlled, always doing the right thing. But behind that perfect behavior is a storm waiting to happen. They push everything they consider bad or shameful deep inside. But instead of healing it, they just bury it. This is the core of the one who hides their shadow. Someone trying to stay positive all the time until their darkness takes charge. Carl Jung spent much of his life studying this hidden side of us. In Aion, he wrote, "The shadow is everything we don't want to admit about ourselves, but that still shows up in some way. This shadow isn't something outside of us. It's not the world's evil, not other people, not the enemy. It's within. It's the anger you won't admit to, the jealousy you explain away, the sexual desires you ignore, the hunger for power you hide behind modesty. Whatever you refuse to face in yourself doesn't vanish. It becomes your shadow. And as Jung said, what you don't make conscious controls your life, and you call it fate." On the surface, the person hiding their shadow doesn't seem dangerous. They often seem admirable, organized, kind, always helping others. But you'll notice something is off. They can't handle weakness. They get uncomfortable with emotional honesty. They seem tense but never lose it, until one day they do, and when it happens, it's intense. This person is always trying to manage their emotions. They avoid feeling things, so they judge others who do. They don't let themselves fail, so they go after those who make mistakes. They become strict, critical, and controlling. But all of this is just their way of keeping the unconscious from bursting out. Jung made it clear, the stronger the mask, the more hidden the shadow. And the more the shadow is pushed down, the more violent it will be when it comes out. You can spot this pattern in people who overreact, who blow up over small things, who hold grudges forever, and who sabotage relationships through silent bitterness. These are the so-called difficult people who everyone finds hard to understand. They're bitter, resentful, and overly critical. The reason for this behavior lies in their shadow, which is unaddressed, ignored, and not accepted. But here's an important point. The shadow is not only made up of bad qualities. Jung emphasized that it also includes your hidden potential, creativity, and strength that you deny. When ignored, though, the shadow turns into something toxic, and this toxicity seeps into relationships, environments, and especially affects those closest to them. Living with someone who has an unaddressed shadow is like walking through an emotional minefield, where you never know where the next emotional explosion will come from. However, this repression doesn't happen by accident. Often, it stems from a sense of superiority and a rigid moral code that uses guilt as a tool to control others. This brings us to the next dangerous type, the moral controller. This person not only suppresses their own desires, but makes you feel guilty for pursuing yours. In the next section, we will discuss this type that Jung considered one of the biggest obstacles to psychological freedom. These are the so-called guardians of virtue, who deep down hide their own demons. Not every oppressor wields a sword. Some use rules, dogmas, crosses, and moral phrases. They present themselves as driven by ethics, righteousness, and morality. But in reality, they trap themselves and others in a cage made of guilt and shame. Jung recognized this archetype. He pointed out that when morality is used as a mask, it becomes one of the most harmful forms of psychological repression. The moral controller is someone who, instead of addressing their shadow, projects it onto the behavior of others and condemns them for what they refuse to accept within themselves. You've likely encountered such people, those who are quick to judge others but never look inward. They present themselves as examples of good behavior, not because they truly are, but because they need to maintain the image of moral superiority. Jung suggested that the greater the repression, the more intense the need to project the shadow. This is what the moral controller does. They turn others into sinners, deviants, or immoral people in order to avoid confronting their own impulses, desires, and contradictions. The problem here is that, unlike regular emotional manipulators, the moral controller believes they are doing the right thing. They genuinely think they are helping, correcting, or teaching others. This makes their influence even more dangerous, as it is cloaked in authority, good intentions, and a false sense of spirituality. Their criticism often comes with phrases like, "It's for your own good, you'll thank me later," or "Someone has to tell you the truth." But this truth is not impartial, it's filled with projection. In his book Aion, Jung discusses the figures of Christ and the Antichrist as archetypes representing wholeness and dissociation. The moral controller believes they are embodying light, yet they are blind to their own darkness. They project evil onto others in an effort to maintain the illusion of purity. This makes them dangerous, as they can't see the complexities of the human soul. If you live with someone like this, you may begin to feel constantly guilty, as if you're always doing something wrong. Even in moments when you're just living your life, you may feel watched, judged, and minimized. The most twisted part is that you might begin to internalize this judgment. You start repressing parts of yourself that are completely natural and human, molding yourself into an ideal that isn't your own. The moral code of others becomes your prison. This dynamic is common in families, religions, and environments where obedience is equated with virtue. Jung considered this kind of extreme moralism to be a genuine threat to the process of individuation. Where there is excessive moralism, there is a lack of self-awareness. The extreme moralist doesn't seek truth, they seek control. And when they can't control the outside world, they begin controlling the inner world of those around them. But the moral controller isn't the only one driven by unconscious forces. There's another type of person who is even more unpredictable, unstable, and volatile, the one dominated by complexes. While the moralist represses and projects, the person with complexes is fully controlled by unconscious emotions and reacts like a puppet. In the next part, we'll dive into the chaotic realm where the mind loses control and past traumas take over. Prepare to meet the type of person who can be loving today and tear you apart tomorrow without even knowing why. Imagine living with someone who is sweet, caring, and kind one moment, and then suddenly bursts into anger, shuts down, or accuses you of something you never did. A simple compliment becomes a demand. A harmless joke turns into an attack. A kind gesture feels like a threat. No matter what you do, you always feel like you're on shaky ground. This is what it's like to live with someone ruled by unconscious complexes. Jung defines complexes as emotional and memory clusters that exist in the unconscious mind, capable of taking control of a person's behavior at any moment. They're like fragmented personalities within us, formed by past traumas, wounds, and unresolved experiences. In his work Psychological Types and the Ego and the Unconscious, Jung explains how these complexes can affect how someone behaves. Instead of responding to the present situation, the person reacts based on past wounds. A simple comment can unconsciously trigger old feelings of rejection, abandonment, or humiliation, and those around them feel the consequences. The person with complexes doesn't realize they are being driven by these forces. When they react with rage, extreme sadness, or deep resentment, they think they're being rational, but they're not. They are reliving emotions that haven't been dealt with. The problem is that this doesn't happen consistently. There are emotional explosions mixed with moments of clarity, kindness, or regret. This makes being close to them confusing and even addictive. You start to believe they're not always like this. Sometimes they are wonderful. And that's what keeps you attached, because there are moments of real connection and love. But these moments are followed by unexpected breakdowns, and you find yourself in an emotional storm you don't understand. In an effort to restore peace, you try to adapt, shrink, and mold yourself. You start avoiding certain topics, carefully choosing your words, walking on eggshells, all to avoid triggering the monster within them. But the harsh truth is that the monster isn't triggered by you. It's always there, waiting for any reason to emerge. When it does, it takes over and devours everything around it. For Jung, unrecognized complexes take over the psyche. They speak, feel, and act for you. And for the person with complexes, this takeover happens frequently. They may be controlled by feelings of inferiority, martyrdom, abandonment, or persecution, each complex with its own story, emotions, and demands. The more you try to maintain peace, the more you feed the illusion that it's possible to control something uncontrollable. Living with someone like this means constantly being on high alert. Emotional stability is impossible. The present is always tainted by ghosts of the past, and eventually you start absorbing those ghosts. You begin to question your own feelings, your memories, and your perceptions. Without realizing it, you're being influenced by their unconscious mind. But the most dangerous part is still ahead. While the person with complexes swings between emotional extremes, there's another type who doesn't shout, doesn't explode, doesn't accuse, but drains your energy until you have nothing left. In the next and final section, we'll talk about the psychic vampire. There are people who don't want your presence, they just want your energy. They'll do everything to drain it, not with violence or direct aggression, but with subtle demands, constant victimhood, and emotional dependence disguised as affection. This is the psychic vampire, the most silent and sneaky form of emotional draining that Carl Jung warned about, even though he didn't use that exact term. In Jungian terms, it's the symbol of an unresolved, unhealthy bond between two people, one that prevents personal growth and blurs the boundaries of who we truly are. Jung tells us in his work The Ego and the Unconscious and Aion that one of the biggest threats to our path toward wholeness is these kinds of relationships. In a symbiotic relationship, two people don't see themselves as separate individuals, but as extensions of each other. The psychic vampire thrives in this kind of unhealthy connection. They need your constant attention, your support every day, your availability at all times. But underneath all the need, there's an emptiness that isn't yours and you'll never be able to fill it. It starts with offering a little help. Then you give time. Then you tolerate emotional mistreatment, all in the name of understanding, until you realize that all your energy is being drained and you can't tell where you end and where they begin. The exhaustion is deep. It's not just physical, but existential. It feels like your soul is being drained bit by bit, day after day. Jung described people who, unable to take care of themselves, emotionally attach to others like emotional parasites. As harsh as it sounds, that's the reality. The psychic vampire doesn't want to grow. They just want to be carried by others. But the danger is more than just the exhaustion. It's in losing yourself. You start to feel guilty for wanting space, selfish for wanting quiet, cold for needing distance. The psychic vampire is a master at flipping the roles. They turn from being the victim to becoming the accuser. From being needy, they turn into the manipulator. And before you know it, you're living just to avoid conflict, to keep the peace, to maintain a bond that's eating away at you inside. Jung gives us a way to make the unconscious conscious. This applies to both others and ourselves. Because at some point, you might have been a psychic vampire, or a complex person, or someone trapped in the persona. None of us is immune. We all have shadows. We all have pain. The difference is in who has the courage to face it and who chooses to project that pain onto others. This video has been a mirror, a look into the dynamics that bind us, hurt us, and keep us unconscious. If you've watched all the way to the end, it means you're ready to see, to understand, and to break free. This is the first and most powerful kind of freedom. It's not about blaming others. It's about stepping out of the victim role and taking back control over your own mind. Now, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment sharing which of these types you've encountered and which ones you might even see in yourself. Your comment could spark the beginning of awareness for both you and those who read it. And before you go, I have an important announcement. The next video is just as essential. It will take you even deeper on this journey of self-understanding. Keep watching. You need to see, because the more we bring the unconscious into the light, the less control it has over us. See you there.